So hi class, hi Professor Winters, this is Nathan. I am flying to Baltimore with my friend here, Chris Markuson, who is the Economic Development and GIS Manager for Pueblo County. And I thought it might be interesting for us to kind of discuss smart growth in communities in Colorado, particularly Pueblo, which Chris, he's certainly responsible for the county's work and is probably familiar with the city's work as well. So I thought it would be interesting to hear from him. Pueblo was one of my candidates for last month's discussion. We got postponed. I figured this might be a good opportunity. I'm obviously not going to be in class tomorrow night, but maybe you guys could see this beforehand or during class, and it makes up that little short segment of time that I had. But Chris, you've been in Pueblo for how long?
12 years now.
12 years. And you've seen a lot of things happen, I'm sure?
It always changing, yes.
Right, okay. And let's see, how long have you been in the role that you have now?
I've been the Director of Economic Development and GIS. We combined things 3 years ago.
3 years ago, okay. Okay. And, our class has been talking particularly about smart growth initiatives. In last week's discussion in class, I was concerned about a couple of things. Number one, scale seems to have an issue, or at least, when we were discussing about San Diego and Chula Vista, in the same area, one was much more able to meet some smart growth goals than another. I think largely because of scale. Pueblo being third largest.
I think we're actually 8th largest in the state.
Oh, because of the larger suburbs
right.
in and around, like Aurora, that's true.
Springs.
But as far as a metro area in Colorado, would you say it's the third? Or is Grand Junction?
We vacillate back and forth with Grand Junction,
okay.
And Greeley has kind of overtaken us lately.
Well, that makes sense with the oil and gas development there. Okay. But one of the reasons that drew my attention to Pueblo in particular about this idea is that a lot of smart growth initiatives fall right in line with urban redevelopment. Looking at existing infrastructure, existing facilities, and how those can be reused for different purposes as industries and communities change. So I don't know if you're able to talk freely for a while on smart growth and how that relates to Pueblo or doesn't, but give you a chance here.
Well, it's interesting because, smart growth, that terminology is something that urban planners use a lot, and a lot of times that doesn't necessarily coincide with elected officials and their visions of the community.
Right.
And everybody thinks that their town is growing in the smart direction, right? And it's just inherently so.
Right.
But, it's counterintuitive. That's really not how most cities operate. And, from my experience in researching other communities and actually dealing with Pueblo's politics and the economy and businesses and so forth, that smart growth as a philosophy, as a methodology, is actually pretty rare. Because the pressures on local government to build a tax base are pretty great. And that in order to do that tax-based growth, the pressure is, and the temptation to develop something on the outskirts of town that brings some, auspices of 1,000 jobs.
A large industry presence.
Big industry is really alluring to elected officials.
Right.
And it's politically, something that they're very, very cognizant of. And so from economic development philosophies since the 1980s, really, communities have really stuck to that methodology for some time.
Finding industry.
Absolutely, especially blue-collar communities, Pueblo being very similar to that.
Steel.
Absolutely. Manufacturing-based communities are really adhere to that very tightly. And so the method and the thought of a smart growth initiative that looks at urban redensification is threatening to many in that environment. And so sometimes people actually have deliberate activity to undermine those kinds of efforts. and sometimes, especially developer communities that have elected leadership that have been a part of the development community for a long time, actually sabotage smart growth initiatives, which is kind of interesting because they
own land, they want to develop that land,
right.
They want to develop it on their time frame and according to their sale price.
Absolutely.
When demand is good.
The same thing goes with commercial builders. Sometimes it's easier and cheaper to build. It's often, almost always, easier and cheaper to build a tin shed on the outskirts of town and occupy it with different things, build a new road and so on and so forth. But the thing is that the city and the community is left holding the bag in terms of police support, fire support, infrastructure, outlay, so on and so forth. And that's really the rub. It's difficult to justify the exponential cost increase on the outskirts of town.
We need to take on the long-term operations maintenance.
So it's about who fronts the bill, who's paying the piper, so to speak.
Right.
Is this in a smart growth community? You've got urban intensification, and the bill is being fronted by the developer, and therefore their tenants typically. But in a non-smart community, you've got the growth that's occurring, and the city's fronting the bill for a lot of that. And so that's a succinct difference between the two. But really, one of the fundamental pieces I think that's required for a community to become a smart growth community is a very strong, very well thought out master plan, a comprehensive plan for the community. And there's the communities that have that, put in that legwork initially, that comp plan pays off, especially if the development really adheres to the guidelines and the thought behind that comp plan. Comprehensive plans are very, very difficult to achieve without community buy-in. You actually have to have really a community consensus around the difficult topics that you bring up in that kind of context. And so it's expensive. It really is expensive to create a good comprehensive plan that all of the stakeholders, basically all of your citizens,
feel like they're
community,
invested.
They're invested.
Been listened to.
Absolutely. So the values of the citizens need to be articulated in that plan.
Right.
And sometimes where developers go, where communities go awry, is that they don't listen. They don't listen to what their citizens are saying. And so in certain communities, especially...
Or they don't want to listen, or for whatever expediency, or
various issues at play. And so in communities where you have a blue-collar workforce, where you've got a lesser degree of higher education in the populace, it becomes the comprehensive plan may have to, or may just take on the characteristics of those citizens, where they value chains and fast food restaurants and large boulevards and non-walkable communities more than communities that have a higher educated workforce, that have a university presence, and that value a walkable community. And it happens. There are precedents all over the country where one community chooses this style versus another style. It kind of happens. Right. And so in the case of San Diego versus Chula Vista and places like that, you can point back to the comprehensive planning process. A, did they do it? B, did they listen to authentic dialogue with their citizens?
Right.
And there's a case that when they don't do that, you have problems. And your smart growth initiative just goes no place.
Right.
And you can have the best intentions of an elected official and the highest, most educated on the issues,
right?
Environmental sustainability and financial sustainability and so on and so forth. But if your citizens don't buy into it, it's not going to work. It's going to fail. And so, it is possible in a blue-collar town, and this is what we're trying to do in Pueblo. It's not easy. It takes many years to educate the workforce and the citizens on really what it takes to run a city and to be a city, and to have the kinds of amenities and describe what those amenities are in other communities that make your own town a place where people choose to live. Instead of living there out of necessity, choosing to live there is an interesting thing. And a lot of people don't really value that. They don't understand that. And so it takes...
a lot of people have to say like moving to Denver are doing it not because they have a job there.
Right.
They move there and then they will find a job.
Exactly.
And that seems to be working out for them. Maybe everybody's just really lucky. But right, you're right. The helping the existing population understand the opportunities that they have, and having them want to make choices they might not have made in the past, would take a little bit of not persuasion, but helping them to understand what the principles and values of that decision making.
So what we've been starting with is some values that are universal in the community, and everybody wants a good job.
Okay.
Everybody wants to be able to go to the kind of restaurant that they value, that they want.
Right.
But what we've been trying to say is the restaurant can be more profitable in a downtown context, especially because the outlay that the restaurant would have to put in, we could potentially deal with issues in the downtown context to seed the economy, so to speak, so that you can think about some of the principles that a shopping mall have used for years in a downtown environment, and that if your citizens can come to appreciate that a downtown environment can be a nice nest for business, pedestrian activity, well then that's kind of neat, and it's a vibrant area that you want to hang out in.
Yeah.
And so if we could describe, look at Pearl Street Mall in Boulder and see that, hey, it's rich. It didn't start off rich. It started off kind of a
Pretty poor.
bit of a failure, really.
Okay.
Take away people's ability to park in front of their storefronts, and
People didn't like that at
merchants
first.
freak out.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, even in Colorado Springs, they changed the home from being
Oh yeah.
one-way to two-way, and they freaked out of that. So.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So the ability, doing things differently, and showing people, hey, look at how this community has done things, and learn from them, and there's precedent for stuff. It goes a long way. But a part of it too is that you.
All right, so we talked a little bit about Pueblo and its downtown environment in particular versus chains, which people line up at the door for, which isn't totally unlike Colorado Springs.
Right.
We tend to like our suburban everywhere lifestyle, but I think that is changing, and there are those who are appreciating more the things that are unique in town. Not just establishments that are restaurants, but your parks like Garden of the Gods and stuff like that. It's interesting to read about the profiles of all the candidates for today's election in Colorado Springs, and how many of them were advocating for their favorite park in town.
Oh yeah, sure.
So I guess one of the questions I have about Pueblo is there are some things that could be unique to Pueblo about urban redevelopment that are to your advantage.
Right.
Is that how Pueblo sees it? And what has been effective and what has not been effective?
So it's interesting. Pueblo does have a very interesting city structure where it's a lot like Pittsburgh, where you've got really micro city centers all over the place, and you've got it comes from ethnic groups that formed out of necessity as workers for various industries, steel in particular, and created neighborhood-centric models, which is interesting. So we've got neighborhoods that are very, very intact, that have a neighborhood grocery store, they have a church, they have a liquor store across the street from the church.
So there's neighborhood identity in Pueblo that's inherent.
Absolutely. Solid identity.
That's interesting.
And conventional urban planning doesn't facilitate those kinds of things, where you have more of an urban center. And the urban center is where your commerce occurs, and you have these suburban sort of residential areas on the periphery. Pueblo has an interesting mix, and it actually is a plus and it's a big minus at the same time. The Euclidean zoning kind of methodology that one would usually employ in a city doesn't really work very well in Pueblo, because
of these neighborhoods. People want to have their neighborhood market.
Exactly.
Okay.
So and it's
Dry cleaning.
yeah, a variety of things. And, you know, we've got areas where you've had a high amount of commercial activity inside of a residential neighborhood, and that leads to some current value differences of opinion versus 1930s, 1920s values that started where it was okay to live next to a gas station.
Yeah, there was no harm.
Right.
As far as they knew.
And now, you know, nobody really wants to live next to a gas station because gas stations are smelly, noisy places.
Yes.
And so conventional Euclidean zoning or more progressive zoning solves those issues. But probably we're still dealing with a lot of that because, you know, the economy has shaped so much. And that, you know, we've had an industrialized background, and really the community started with absolutely no planning at all.
Right.
In so many different
It was
places.
more like trade along the river in Mexico, U.S. No?
Yeah, there were really three separate towns that kind of merged together when Pueblo was, expanded because of the steel industry.
Yeah.
And so that combination of things created some complexity. And then, you know, Pueblo was definitely behind the ball, behind the eight ball, in terms of urban planning back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, where they didn't start from a place of public input. They just kind of, you know, had the good old boy club, the paternalistic society that said, hey, this is what we're going to do, and we're going to knock this over, and we're going to do this, and really uninformed about the desires of the community and what citizens were. So we're still kind of we're really dealing with a lot of that, and it makes it for a very difficult conversation to have with the community about what kind of formula we're going to look at. And
Because these guys have memories.
yeah, they do. They have memories, and they have deep financial ties to things going on in the community, and it makes it difficult. It really does. So we've not been a great model for things, but it's interesting to look at with a different kind of a hat. You know, the opportunities that we have could be wide-ranging as we move forward.
There we go. But what has been effective in the short or long term?
That's a kind of a hard question to ask. You know, we've had an opportunity around the Riverwalk,
Right.
the Union Avenue district,
Right.
to do some very major urban revitalization work, and that came with some costs associated, for sure, in a variety of ways. Where we've prioritized.
Does the community think that was very risky?
Oh, for sure. It was a big gamble that the community took back in the mid '90s when that vote came up for
Right.
funding the Riverwalk, and I think it's paid off in a pretty big way, where, you know, the Union Avenue Historic
It's accepted
District
now.
is accepted. It has retail activity. It's maybe not the strongest. It's not as strong as it could be. But it's getting there. It's getting much more prominent. And the Riverwalk is the same way, too, where we've got good activity going on. And if you think about it, the Riverwalk first opened for business in 2001.
Right.
And so it's
pretty
only
recent.
been around for 14 years.
Yeah.
And in 14 years, there's been a huge change in the community, where really 16 years ago, literally, the Union Avenue district was still a red light district. There was active, open prostitution occurring, and it was sanctioned by the city fathers. And so that is gone, and the Riverwalk changed a huge amount of that. The other thing, too, is the historic preservation work that's gone on in the area, as well as I got to give credit to the creative corridor, a new designated arts district, has done more for that part of Pueblo in the last 3 years than anybody can surmise. Just in 2013 alone, I don't have the 2014 numbers yet, we had 153 new jobs fully attributed to the creative district.
That's a large number for a small city.
Yeah.
And I look at Arts District, and it was good in notion, but it struggled. Sometimes being small to non-existent, and other times, being somewhat strong with some good anchors.
Well, there's some pluses about being loosely regulated community also, where artists and artisans can really thrive. If you can say, hey, this is your area. If you want to create a new park in this little corner niche of town, you can find out a way to fund it, and it doesn't cause a fire hazard.
We're not going to hold you back.
We won't inhibit you, and that has actually happened. And so the artists in Pueblo have really taken ownership of their district, and they see it as their district and the
Literal
community's
ownership.
district.
Yeah.
It's really, really wonderful.
Really
and so gallery numbers and the First Friday Art Walk numbers and all those kinds of activities have really skyrocketed in the last couple of years. And as the economy continues to improve, it's going to get better and better and better. And I think that has a
You mean the general economy, the national economy?
Well, the national economy, and as the national economy recovers, Pueblo's local economy is going more and more toward creative industry in the downtown context, and that's actually the thing that's shaping the form of that part of the community.
Okay.
We have other parts of town that are failing, and they're dying on the vine, and that's really problematic and difficult to see. And a lot of it is that we're still very financially depressed as a community. We have abject poverty in many, many different parts of town, and you see that in our crime statistics, and you see it in a variety of different ways. And so we're trying to solve those problems and bring better paying jobs. And so really, my role as the Economic Development Director is to say, hold on, guys, we're not focusing on call centers coming to our community anymore. We will not accept low-paying jobs. We will not incentivize any of these kinds of things.
I find that funny because Colorado Springs has become the call center for Colorado in many respects, which is surprising because it was a more higher educated workforce.
You have to think about elected officials, and they look at things in a short-term benefit. Right? They only have a limited amount of time in office.
True.
And so if a call center is all that they're able to get, and they have
at least
to
they've got
gains,
numbers. Yeah.
They've got something to show for it.
Right.
But from a strategic plan, if you have a comprehensive plan, you have some knowledge about where we are, where we need to be, and a structured methodology on how you get toward that, and you equip your elected officials with that, and really allow them a little bit more flexibility publicly to say, hey, we're making gains, and allow people to appreciate 10 $100,000 a year jobs as opposed to 100 $10 an hour jobs. In setting the community's expectations of what success is. That is a really key piece to showing that the community is thriving and moving forward. Because you really have to have both government staff level folks, community members, but you also have your elected officials are really important. They need to have a win, and you need to be able to give them that kind of win in order for the community to succeed. It's paramount. Psychologically, but also because they work on a 4-year schedule, and if they're not performing in 4 years,
they're not going to get reelected. They're not going to put another post somewhere else.
Exactly, they lose their paycheck. It disrupts why they ran for office in the first place, and so I think that's important.
So there's a few key questions. You talked about the Riverwalk. You talked about the Union Avenue
district. Yeah.
Does that include Does Pueblo have a railroad?
We do.
Union.
So
Station.
Yep. It does, and so that the Union Station, the Union, we call it the depot.
Yeah.
Well, the Union Depot. There's a phraseology there that's kind of subtle in Pueblo that makes a difference.
Yeah.
We'll there's an Army thing, but
we'll get to that too.
That is important, and it's one of those vital infrastructure pieces. And it's really, we've been lobbying very heavily and working really hard to try and get the Amtrak train to come to Pueblo,
right?
So we can reestablish passenger rail service nearby, and so that's a critical piece that allows us to create a business case for intermodal transportation planning and working with high-speed rail or even light rail between Springs and Pueblo and Denver and so forth. And having that southern connection to that is really important for that. But it's also critically important to our neighbors. And so we realize that Pueblo's economy is very dependent upon the upper and lower Arkansas Valley communities.
Right, or at least they on you.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's vice versa. It's a great relationship that has to be fostered so that we protect the economies of our neighbors in a way that makes sense. And so the Amtrak train is just absolutely vital to Lamar, La Junta, and Trinidad and their economies.
Right.
And so to be best neighbors, we need to keep that going there. If we can increase ridership on Amtrak by allowing Colorado Springs or Denver citizens to drive a shorter distance and get on the train, take off to California or go to Chicago on the train, well, that's just a wonderful business case thing that we want to do. We need to make sure that the dollar figures that we are subsidizing in that are commensurate with the payoff.
Right.
And that's where the controversy is right now and how we're doing it.
Whether it's worth it or not.
So part of what our strategy is as well is that Pueblo being a community that's focusing on rail as an industry hub of sorts. We've got the available land and the available infrastructure and the presence of the Transportation Technology Center, which is another thing.
Right. So
those are assets. And so if we can capitalize on rail presence as a community identity piece, then we can start to build a cluster, an industry cluster around rail as an intrinsic quality of the community.
we certainly got enough rail yards to use to be able to do that. Which I was going to get into, asking about old steel plant lands and properties and facilities, the old power plant, which is looking at reuse possibly.
Yep.
And then as your role in the county, you're probably looking a lot more at things beyond the city,
right.
or maybe not. But like the Chem Depot, the high-speed rail center,
yes.
And or the Vestas work. So I don't know if you want to talk about those and how it all plays into the community at large.
So part of what we've been really working on is, as a community, we've been a single industry community for a very long time, where steel was the backbone of things.
Yeah.
And so when things crashed in the 80s, we had that huge bust. And so part of the strategy of the community for a long time has been, okay, let's refocus on manufacturing as an industry.
Let's get another manufacturing industry back
we'll just get something in and
replace it,
perpetuating sort of this boom-bust cycle problems that can happen when you have a single employer or a single industry sector. So what we're really trying to do is to diversify the economy, and to bring as many industry sectors that are complementary together, that are in line with the values of the community. And so rail is one of them. Renewable energy is something that we are certainly intrinsically poised to take advantage of. And so that's why we've invested a lot of time and a lot of energy in getting the largest solar array in Colorado, and actually it's the largest one east of the Rocky Mountains, being built in Pueblo. It's actually starting this summer.
Is that going to be southeast of town, or?
Yes, actually, just straight south of town, right behind the Comanche Power Plant. The 3 smokestacks that you'll see as you come into Pueblo. So that will be the large 900 acres of solar right there. Okay. That's phase 1.
Okay.
I've got many phases to go, which is great, and it's a characteristic of the community that we really could take advantage of. And I got to talk about marijuana too.
Good. And don't let me forget about the airport as well.
Sure. Okay. All of those elements. So marijuana, the fact that we've got a regulatory environment and we have that's conducive to grow.
A high level of interest.
Exactly. And a lot of interest.
And it's in the unincorporated area of Pueblo.
It is.
Which is contrast to most others that are approving marijuana, which are primarily municipal.
And, funny enough, it actually fits into the values of what we as a community want to do in keeping water and water rights tied to the land. And so one of the things that we're looking at is how
by
agriculture in general can be supported. And so if marijuana is something that is viable, and that's something that we can regulate in a way that is safe for our citizens.
Right.
And there's spin-off industry that generates dollars.
Right.
Let's explore it. And so that's exactly what we're doing. And so, I worked with Vincente Soderberg, who are the authors of Amendment 64. We actually hired them right after the Amendment 64 passed to help us draft our land use
pretty
codes.
effective in
Yes.
getting their amendment through. I was really surprised. I think most people were.
Pretty interesting. So yeah, we're certainly on that gravy train, and hoping that it is going to be a payoff longer term for the community.
The drink.
Yeah, we're way over your 10-minute time.
Okay.
Sorry, glass.
It's okay. So all these different marijuana you're talking about,
Right.
and grow, literally growing water.
Yeah, we are emphasizing and actually being good promoters of grow of marijuana, both indoors and outdoors. Outdoors is a third of the price to cultivate.
Really?
And that has value in a lot of different ranges, both for. So we're talking about marijuana and the role that plays in Pueblo. We are certainly looking at industrialized hemp and UCCS marijuana things to grow. Because we've got land, we've got agricultural areas, we've got water that we want to tie to the land, so on and so forth. But we're also trying to identify ways that those value-added products and the industry that can utilize that can really complement our economy. And
like finance or
a variety of things. So we're seeing some interesting clusters forming with marijuana, and part of it is pharmaceuticals. And so the folks that are doing extrusion business or extraction, where they actually take the oils out of a THC plant, they process those, they refine them, and they turn them into lotions, creams, and other things like that. We're running a lot of research and development activity. And so as we're trying to bridge this gap of poverty and bring good jobs to the community or employ people with good livable wages, that's one sector where we're uniquely posed to take advantage of that and capitalize on that. Healthcare is really one of our largest, is the largest industry in Pueblo.
because of the aging populace.
Aging populace, but we also have really good medical specialties. We've got a lot of
Good hospital.
Two great hospitals that really are doing interesting things. We've got a cancer treatment center that's really well supported. It's pretty interesting. And so those jobs pay well, but part of what we want to do is developing industry clusters is to bring complementary industry in that also leverages our educational capacity. So CSU Pueblo has a doctorate in nursing.
Oh, really?
PCC has several programs in the medical area. Yeah. We've got good capacity in that. And so leveraging those kinds of things together in conjunction with marijuana, I think there's great opportunity for Pueblo, where other communities in Colorado just don't have that kind of opportunity. So again, taking advantage of the intrinsic characteristics of the community is really the fundamental overriding element about why we're going to do one thing versus another, and what differentiates us from Springs or Denver in activities, things you want to attract. Absolutely. Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Can you talk about the Chem Depot's activities?
Oh, yeah.
Other activities at the airport?
That's great. So, the Pueblo has been one of 7 locations in the country that have been home to the nation's stockpile of chemical weapons, which is an interesting history to have. But we've got
Again, because of railroad.
Centralized location, somewhat safe, very, very autonomous. Dry is a big advantage. And so the military housed chemical weapons in Pueblo, particularly mustard agent, which is a sludge, not a gas. We hear about mustard gas, but
when finished, you'll have
it will be the intent once with the base realignment closure process, the BRAC process, is that it has to be reused for some use.
Yes.
And we've gone through many different analyses of what that use could be, and our goal as a community is to make that use that has a financial payoff to the community. So we're going through a comprehensive strategic, imagine that, plan, and looking at what kinds of industry, whether or not whether we can do residential things, which is really unfeasible on a former military base like the one that we have. So it really is poised, absolutely, to be.
But it could certainly be another warehouse district or
Any number of things. So we're looking at a variety of things. So renewable energy is definitely one of them.
right. Make the whole thing a solar array.
Yeah, I mean, 24,000 acres of solar is enough to power the city the size of Denver. A couple million people. It's pretty large.
So it's a good chunk of real estate in and of itself.
It's huge. And that's with today's solar technology. Imagine what it'll be in 5 years from now when innovation completely changes itself. So yeah, we're looking at that, but also things like rail. There's there's 100 and some miles of rail on the depot base right now.
Could it be an extension of the rail
Absolutely.
center?
You have a lot of autonomy and a lot of flexibility, and so we're exploring all of those things. So it's a really interesting opportunity to say, hey, we've got this city-sized area that has its own water systems. It's got a multi-billion-dollar facility already on it. It's actually in close proximity and is supported by electrical, natural gas infrastructure already. We're working on deploying fiber optic
It's not far from the
broadband to
airport
it.
either.
Absolutely, it's just down the way from the airport. It's uniquely posed to be a data center for a Google-sized data center. It's a renewable energy research and development hub in conjunction with the university. It's posed to be even as silly as it sounds, a place where police could go and do their training and drive cars around and shoot things and blow stuff up. Whatever. There are elements and parts of the base that make a lot of sense for those kinds of activities. There's been a lot of stuff that happened on that base over time, including Pershing missiles that were there one time. Once one of them got hit by a bolt of lightning and blew up. And so you have about a 1 square mile area of unexploded ordnance map area. Okay, and how do you deal with that? Well, the Army's on the hook to do it. The most cost-effective way of cleaning that up would be to have limited footprints of, say, solar panels on top of it. And so you're going to have a lot of people walking around. What are you digging under the earth? If you're just digging in little footholes, little foundations and minimum amounts of cleanup. But you don't want to have a neighborhood where little Bobby is digging in the sandbox and finds an unexploded.
The residential neighborhood.
Yeah, that wouldn't be fun. We're working on, and it's an interesting complexity, but it's also poses some pretty interesting opportunities to develop the site. And pronghorn antelope get a place to be also. And so there's certainly parts of the depot that are prime, untouched property for well-being and open range and biodiversity and so forth.
Like the Rocky Mountain Arsenal is.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So it's interesting. It's a urban planner's, landscape architect's dream.
To have a state like that. Yeah.
It is.
Okay. Well, I was going to ask. There's a neighborhood in Pueblo now that has been awarded a Superfund. But it is a very highly residential neighborhood. And the cleanup in that area is not going to be like a cleanup on an old military installation where you have control over the land and the water. So does that play into any kind of environmental economic sustainability?
Oh, absolutely.
How?
It's really important. So we've got an intact neighborhood. It's one of those ethnic neighborhoods in Pueblo that has a very strong presence of the same house.
Yeah.
And so we have renters in the neighborhood, new folks that have a different level of care of their lawns and so forth. And so we are seeing more exposed dirt and incidences where the site was a smelter for about 10 years. It was a very short period of time.
That isn't very long.
Now the soil underneath the former lawns in the area is poisoning children. And you've got lead and arsenic issues happening. And so the health department and the EPA is taking notice of those issues. And so it's an opportunity now for us to rethink about a neighborhood that's in a state of flux, and it's got a lot of challenges to preserve and protect some of the historic elements of the neighborhood, but allow EPA dollars to come through and to help to clean up the lawns, replace a lot of the earth, do some mitigation work, and then when you rebuild those things, to reimagine an aging streetscape and allow pedestrian, infuse some of the modern values that the new community really wants to see. So walkable community, like town house kind of. Well, I think more just the streetscape change that allows wider sidewalks for neighbors to interact with each other in a more pedestrian-centered environment instead of a vehicle-centered environment that it was.
Right.
And then on the edge of it, it's interesting too. It's a community that has both residential and industrial use in it. Parts of the old smelter site are certainly industrialized
Today in use.
And largely vacant.
Okay.
But it's because it's an interesting opportunity for us to leverage all the tools in the city toolkit, everything from tax increment financing to capitalization in different ways, leveraging some of the EPA dollars, looking at other sites that have gone through an EPA cleanup and done a really good job of reimagining a dilapidated district and turning it into something that's more modern. There's a few cases, actually one in Utah that I think is really a great example. You have to ask me, I forget the exact name of it. It's not really, it's actually, it's identical. It was an old smelter. Okay. And it was a slag heap.
Oh, Geneva?
No.
The Geneva steel plant?
I forget. I'll think of it in a minute. But it's a great case example that the EPA posed that said we left open, the EPA when they were doing their rehab work, left open trenches for city infrastructure to be placed, so they put broadband, storm water, salt wastewater, all those kinds of things in, and then created a commercial district. And they actually have, kind of like a suburban sort of commercial district where you have a Lowe's and grocery store, and those kinds of uses, all complementary in that area, and took a taxable value piece of land that was absolutely nothing into being a high dollar commerce center, which is kind of interesting. And so, it's an opportunity for us to think about that kind of reuse in conjunction with this neighborhood is right on the edge of I-25 and a new vision for I-25 going through Pueblo. So we have an opportunity to think about how to keep things together and really have a very complicated but new vision for commercial and residential activity that's complementary to each other. But definitely a challenge, not an easy project, but an interesting opportunity.
Because of the proximity to that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you could use some of that land perhaps for freeway expansion
Yes.
Or commercial property near the
Yes.
Exit of a freeway, but integrating it within residential and partly industrial, so it's very mixed.
Definitely.
But not like integrated, just close proximity to one another.
Definitely.
Okay.
So definitely a challenge. It'll be a lot of fun.
Right.
We'll see.
Right.
And it doesn't have to be purely industrialized use. We could look at it as a way that there's an opportunity for a different recreational element, a different kind of a park, or a different amenity that the community may be interested in adopting. So we don't really have those plans in place, but the only way to really do that again, go back to my original comment, strategic comprehensive plan that encompasses community input.
Yeah, because then the buy-in is long.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it'll be supported by the community.
Right. Thanks, Chris. We'll put this in, share with my class at the very least.